Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Business Between Us podcast. My name is Siyonna Okeke, a business information systems major at the University of Pittsburgh.
And I am her mom, Dr. Nkem Okeke, and I am a business owner, executive, and also a lifelong student of how people work and how markets move in general. Today's episode is titled The Market Within the Mind, and it's all about understanding the world through an economic lens, how micro and macro forces shape the choices that we make on a daily basis.
Yes. So last time we had a conversation about programming, and this one I feel like is a pretty good follow-up. While coding teaches more about logic, economics teaches more about behavior, the logic of people rather than machines.
And I love that phrase, the logic of people. And with the recent inflation shifts that have happened, interest rate swings, and evolving customer or consumer habits as a result, there is no better time to understand how economic theory meets the real world decision making.
For sure. So, for people that may not be completely familiar with micro or macroeconomics, we're just going to start with the basics. So, in my economics courses, we cut it into those specific two halves, micro and macro. So, micro looks at the more smaller picture, where it's individual markets, the introduction of supply and demand, pricing, and consumer behavior. So, it answers certain questions like, why does the price of coffee go up when its supply drops?
I'm happy you used coffee as an example because I'm a coffee drinker, but it also answers questions like how do businesses decide what to charge for their product or their service?
Exactly. So on the other hand of that, there's macroeconomics, what kind of zooms out of the bigger picture. So basically national and global trends like GDP, inflation, unemployment, and fiscal policy. It's about understanding how the entire economy moves. For example, macroeconomics can explain how a recession affects spending across industries, and it studies the big picture of the economy as a whole.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that micro is like looking at one tree and macro is like looking at the entire forest.
Exactly. So that's why the way I learned it was that every big market trend starts with small individual decisions, specifically with what people buy, whether they choose to save or invest. So we studied models and we would make graphs given by like our different practice problems, like regarding perfect competition, equilibrium, and elasticity. So we would also learn about government interventions on top of that with taxes and subsidies and monetary policies. So what really fascinated me about the whole thing was how both levels were interconnected by human behavior.
Yeah, and what is so fascinating, and I just can speak about how you were raised, is that, most parents, when the child is young, you get them this piggy bank and they start saving coins. And then shortly after you begin to have them do chores and get some payment for chores or set up some type of job system within the home to make them understand that, I work, I earn money, and I get paid and I get to save. So all of that exposure from a young age was really trying to let you know about the microeconomics, as early as the age of 3, 4 years old, and how the individual decisions you make about what you choose to save for or buy. I remember then you go to your piggy bank and get some coins and say, I want some bubble gum. I want some candy and stuff because at that time that's what you felt you wanted to consume. But at least those little innocent things that we put in place, you can begin to appreciate even more now why those things were important because human behavior is a big thing and it starts from somewhere, right? So it's how you are building that behavior over time and what it eventually morphs into. So micro and macro economics, it's like two sides of a coin, but it is that same coin, and you have to know how both sides work and are connected.
Yes. Continuing on, it was also just looking and truly understanding what supply and demand meant. Because I feel like we hear that growing up as well, but using real life examples for it, like how rising grocery prices after the pandemic, it wasn't just inflation, but also tied to things like labor shortages, production costs, and shifting consumer preferences in that time.
Absolutely. The COVID was a perfect example because that's how one small market change just appeared to have a ripple effect. And on the macro side, those ripple effects also influence more, right? Interest
Mm-hmm.
rates, wages, even job growth, it's all connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, question for you is, are you interested to know how this relates to what I do in the business and boardroom, I guess, to tie into what you learn in the classroom?
Yes, for sure. Given that I'm considering to minor in it, I'm still seeing, I just love econ so far. So just
Oh,
understanding how that
nice.
already fits into what you're doing. See
Amazing.
how that goes. Yeah.
Okay, well let's try. It's not something to discuss in a short podcast all at once, but I can
Hmm.
definitely give you some key things to note and make it more grounded for you. Every decision I've made has been influenced by both the micro and the macro factors. For
Hmm.
example, pricing, which is huge for every business. What are you selling at what price, right?
Hmm.
So macro may say to me, set the price based on the demand and the cost of my providing that service or producing that product, right?
Hmm.
But macro would say, consider other things like inflation,
Hmm.
consider consumer confidence, because if inflation is high, it may just cut back on
Hmm.
spending in general. And
Yeah.
even if you think that you have priced your product or your service fairly, it doesn't
Hmm.
mean that people will buy, right?
Right.
So you have to be aware of the
Hmm.
macroeconomics to know the timing and the cycle and how you can adjust accordingly.
So basically, you're saying you can't just look at your internal cost structure, but you also have to look at, the external factors and how people even feel about spending in the first place.
Exactly. You have to think about that.
Hmm.
Another example to drive that in some more is that during the recent inflation in the past year, probably currently still, we had to
Hmm.
make some tough calls. We had to consider raising prices, adjusting salaries, and absorbing
Hmm.
cost. But none of these decisions came easy or they were simple to make because while we were guided by the understanding of supply and demand dynamics, we have to
Hmm.
keep doing that on a constant basis because things kind of changed month after month and we had to just stay abreast with those changes and the dynamics of supply and demand as they were evolving.
That must have been stressful, especially balancing between trying to stay competitive but also stay profitable enough to, keep things going.
What does stress have to do with business? I mean,
Right.
it still is, but we just have
Hmm.
a better way to think through it. What I would say is that where economic literacy is a value add for business owners at times like this is that you understand those forces on a broader level. So, for example, with interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, you can begin to anticipate what will come with that, right? So borrowing money becomes more expensive. So if you don't have to at that time, you don't rethink expanding, which you need funding for, and pause and kind of see what gives. Consumers are also rethinking spending. So your marketing strategy to your consumers needs to kind of be adjusted with the times. So you just don't keep pushing up a wall, you know. So those are the things that I would say lead to the stress of it.
Hmm.
Markets thrive when there's some predictability, and when there's less of that, it's more
Hmm.
stressful because you're constantly thinking, changing, evolving. So that's what I'll say. It was stressful, but you can manage
Hmm.
it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think in class, given that it's like separated into those two separate courses, I do appreciate being able to learn the step by step and understanding the basics of it, but then hearing, in the real world, like how each business has to consider what's going on macro wise, macro wise. It just shows how it like collides in the everyday work.
Yeah, and I know that while we're talking about this more in a concrete way in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the business, the decision, and things like that, we also, as a family, saw the impact of that as well, right? There'll be
Mm-hmm.
times you call me and I was just so busy to slow down a little bit because I had to pay more attention to do X, Y, or Z. And then when we do get to talk, I did, share with you a little bit more about some things that I was considering to do for the business and I needed to adjust for the business. So I think we talk about micro and macroeconomics now as a topic a knowledge
Mm-hmm.
in a knowledge-based setting, but it's real. Like, and this does have impact on the family and choices we can make in terms of adjusting our plans for vacation or to do
Mm-hmm.
it later and now and things like that, just to be sure that you're posturing for the times and making sure your spending and your earning
Mm-hmm.
are kind of aligned. So just as you do that on a personal level, you also have to think of that at a corporate level.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes macro forces can override micro logic.
Mm-hmm.
So during COVID, for instance, demand for certain services was high,
Mm-hmm.
but the macro conditions, like being on lockdown, made
Mm-hmm.
delivery impossible. You just have to be aware these different dynamics and how to adjust accordingly.
Yeah. So it's like they're so connected that like even if the micro side is like, okay, you can go, I want to buy, I want to do this. The macro factors are saying, stop. Like we can't go through
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, and that's why it's good to look at it holistically, like there's two
Mm-hmm.
sides of a coin. I like the way you say macro say go, micro say
Mm-hmm.
stop, and it could be vice versa, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you really have to understand that timing matters. Do your research as a business owner, continuously look at relevant data to
Mm-hmm.
inform you, and do not wait for that data to be perfect. Like you miss
Right.
the opportunity. Businesses often are forced to make decisions with incomplete information, which is
Mm-hmm.
something your textbooks won't tell you or emphasize enough. What you have to ask yourself in that moment is, do I have enough complete information
Mm-hmm.
to make a decision in the moment? And knowing that that's some risks come with that, but the more you do it and keep your variables clear and your
Mm-hmm.
constants clear in terms of how you consider things and make your decision, the better you are at it. Sometimes you
Yeah.
win, sometimes you lose, but you become better at it.
Yeah, studying at macroeconomics about like, monetary and fiscal
Mhm.
policies that comes from the government and how small business owners and even other CEOs they have to see how it affects the business, how they have to move forward. It's like really interesting to see like how it comes into play and how like, every single thing is tied, not even just like you on like an individual level, but how you have to think about as being an owner, thinking about your employees, thinking about all these other things.
Absolutely. And it's not just about waiting for something to happen and then you react, right?
Hmm.
If you're a smart leader, you have to know the trends that impact your business, and monitor those trends, so you can
Hmm.
better strategize. For instance, during the market slowdowns, I double down normally on efficiency and innovation rather than cutting back. Think about it. If I as a consumer need to spend on any service, I want to spend on a service that's more efficient. So if you
Hmm.
double down on being even super efficient, you can see how that keeps your customers' interest. You also have to
Hmm.
focus on innovation, because innovation sometimes is how to do things better, but it's also how to do more with less. So being innovative in terms of thinking through how to do, better with the services or products that you provide is important. And in that instance, that's why I choose to double down on efficiency and innovation rather than cutting back. Now,
Hmm.
some of the business owners may perceive that as a risk. I've had friends who would say, hey, that's a risky decision, which is fine. You have to adjust to your level of risk.
Hmm.
But the larger the risk, as you've heard, the bigger the gain. You have to sort of figure out what does greater risk mean to you versus what it means to another person. So for
Hmm.
me, I stay ahead the best I can by perceiving what I would call a calculated risk that I can take
Hmm.
and position myself for when the cycle turns around so that I sustain my business and my business stays viable.
I like this point that you brought up, even with like the economy shifting on a personal level and how your mindset kind of relates to it. Like you have to determine, am I going to adapt in this situation or I'm going to panic? And if you don't have that, then you're just like in a limbo.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell the tempo of how we're talking now seems calm. That's where I thrive the most. I like it when I'm in a calm, fun mood. When I panic, it's the best of me doesn't come up, right? So I'm
Right.
happy that you're learning that, because the question is, how can you stay in that state of calm to think clearly and make the
Mm-hmm.
best decisions? And that's by planning ahead, that's by strategizing. So economics is not just about money, it's about the psychology, it's about leadership. And this is why I apply what I call a Kaizen, a leadership approach, which is centered on economic psychology and continuous advancement in leading your
Mm-hmm.
way to success. And I do share more about this in my LinkedIn posts.
Gosh, she's on there a lot. So you'll be able to get a lot of
A
not only
lot.
gems on here,
Not
but
a
you
lot. I
get
gotta work. But
but she got some gems over there too. So if you want to know more about anything else, definitely go over to her page as well. Just moving on to sort of like bridging the gap between like the theory and everything. What I feel like I've learned from economics, not only here through this conversation, but also just being in class, I think it just gives you a framework for understanding change monetarily. It's not just about
Mhm.
predicting the future, but it's also having to adapt to it. So I guess what would you think needs to be improved upon in what I learned in school about micro and macro, just from what you've heard today?
First of all, I'll give you credit for what you've been able to know so far. I want to give credits to your college, help it. Uh, and your grandpa's alma mater as well for just a robust curriculum and the different topics that you've been learning in your course. And I would just say that what this podcast offers and what I do offer you and sometimes some of your friends is more in-depth context, right?
Mm-hmm.
You learn models like perfect competition, equilibrium, things you mentioned, but the real world is really messy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Consumer behavior is not always something that you can predict. Sometimes it's not rational,
Mm-hmm.
but it is what it is. So you have to
Right.
be able to understand that. Even government changes policies from time to time, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to adjust with those changes. So whether you're running a business or you're managing your personal budget, economic thinking helps you stay calm and strategic
Mm-hmm.
when the shifts happen, right? So you don't ask yourself, why is this happening to me? You're more
Right.
focused with, how can I respond to this, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you expect that this transition and changes will happen, right? So how do you adjust when it happens? So that way you're always, what I say, proactive, ready, prepared,
Mm-hmm.
and even better still ahead.
I think it's important to hear that because especially right now with like, prices still being high on the consumer side and then also technology changing jobs for me and my generation, we need to know how to adapt and be aware of like what's going on so that we can be proactive rather than reactive. And it shows not just like in the classroom concept, it's about almost like life preparation and not just for our careers, but personally. Yeah.
And I like the way you kind of own that. Over the years, I know, I've been a fun mom, I would say, but I've also been a strict mom in some
Mm-hmm.
areas. And that was all because I always would say, my job as a parent is to prepare you for life. Spiritually, mentally, academically, professionally, the much I can offer,
Mm-hmm.
I will, right? So that you can, take it from there and create your own path and be your own you. So it's funny how those things translate from just cooking a goosey soup in the kitchen to understanding micro and macroeconomics. Yeah, economics teaches discipline and
Mm-hmm.
thinking long term, managing risk, and knowing when to act versus when to wait, pause. Timing, like I said, is everything, and being adaptable, as you mentioned, being aware, those are important. Being adaptable will always beat perfection every single time.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell my team, what you need to not waver on is your clarity of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, and excellence when you are strategizing and executing. That sets you apart. So clarity
Mm-hmm.
of purpose, that's non-negotiable, but you have to be adaptable, flexible, and always pursue excellence when you strategize and try to execute.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So now we're gonna try and introduce something new, a fun little game. So basically, this is like a buzzword buster where I'll give a key term from my classes, and then my mom, Dr. Okeke, will give a memorable twist in her context so she can explain it and you can understand this word a little bit better.
So, like how to be a millionaire?
I mean,
No
not
prizes?
exact. Our own. There's no prize, unfortunately, but just a fun little thing. So I guess just to start off simple, our first key terms will be microeconomics and macroeconomics. What would be your
My
twist?
memorable twists for that is tree and forest.
Okay,
To
the one we brought up earlier. Yeah.
Exactly. You understand the tree better by knowing the forest it exists within, and you know more about the forest by understanding the trees that exist within.
Okay. Good. Okay. Next key term would be consumer behavior.
Ah, a number of things come to mind, but for me in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
my memorable twister for that is consumer behavior revenue generation.
Mm-hmm.
That's for me is the memorable twist there. If you're not thinking about how people behave when it comes to their spending habits,
Mm-hmm.
how would you know how to make them pay for what you're offering, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
doubling down on that even more is huge in terms of understanding things, and you can also attest to this that in the past decade, even beyond that, 2 decades now, I would say, you have the TikTok, the Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and so on and so forth capturing data, and they're
Mm-hmm.
capturing consumer behavior, right? In terms of what you're liking,
Ads
what you're
and
listening
yeah.
to, how you're buying, and you're clicking, and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, because that's in the consumers where they are. Now, you can argue about privacy concerns, but it is, in my opinion, a novel idea to get to market to me knowing that this is what I most likely want to hear or buy. It's all about that. Cause I'm happy you threw out that word. It's huge, consumer behavior. But for me, if you understand that well as a business owner, revenue generation is something that you're guaranteed.
And for our last one, we're just going to keep it at three.
Mhm.
It would be perfect competition.
Perfect competition. I would say the equalizer market, because that's pretty much what the model talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, making sure that things are kind of equal. That's not the real reality out there,
Right.
but at least the pursuit of having something close to that, and how governments see that does matter. It does impact how we buy and sell in an economy and stuff, and I think that's important.
Now to our listeners. Moving on to our listeners loop. And Mom, would you like to
I mean,
talk
yeah,
to them?
we would like them to share what they're thinking about their economic changes. How has it affected you this past year or recently? Having higher rent, interest rates, even career shifts, things like that. We would just love to hear from you. So
Mhm.
please feel free to share more so that we can have this as a very interactive podcast.
Economics, as we've seen and we've heard today, it's definitely everywhere. And I feel like hearing more stories, your story specifically, brings the theory to life. So please share your experiences with us on our social media handles. We are on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much everything. At The Business Between Us, at The Business Between Us podcast. You can also find us on LinkedIn, at our personal names, Nkem Okeke, Siyonna Okeke. That's at The Business Between Us. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, follow us. And you can also email us at thebusinessbetweenus@gmail.com. Again, businessbetweenus@gmail.com. Trying to plug in everything in case I miss everything.
And just to piggyback on the buzzword that we talked about, which was consumer behavior and revenue generation, even though in this sense is value generation, is saying that the more you engage with us on our social media handles and
Mm-hmm.
comment what you like more of, less of, it helps us know how this mother-daughter engagement conversation goes beyond to really bring value
Mm-hmm.
over the next couple of episodes. We intend to improve and advance
Mm-hmm.
and think of different things, but we wanted to kind of start with what you have here, which is talking about what Siyonna has learned
Mm-hmm.
versus how I apply that in business, and have that as an ongoing dialogue. So the conversation about micro and macroeconomics do not stop here. That's what we're trying to say and ask. Let's continue this conversation beyond here, and hopefully maybe have to do an updated version of this, invite guests, any one of you listening who will be interested, so that way we can keep spreading that conversation and with more examples that apply to more people of all demographics. So I would say what we always like to wrap up with is our takeaways. So, Siyonna, what would you say your key takeaway has been today?
I would say that my takeaway is that economics isn't just about like the markets that we learn about, but it's also about the mindsets. And the better you understand what drives behavior, the better you can make more informed decisions based off what you know externally and internally.
That's excellent. And my takeaway, I have a few, but my main one is judgment and timing. Those two things matter a lot, that matter the most. It's what I have to work with every day. And whether it's a household budget or corporate forecast, the same rule apply. I have to have balance, I have to have perspective, and I have to have preparation done. So these are timeless principles. But for me, though, that's my key takeaway: judgment and timing matters.
So next time, we're actually going to get even more granular with money, specifically with financial accounting and an extracurricular I'm a part of called Smart Women Securities, which is a start portfolio club, where we manage our own, try to figure out how we can understand the industries that we're invested in and stuff like that. And we'll explore how women are kind of redefining financial literacy for ourselves and taking control of our wealth journeys.
I really look forward to that one. So we will end this podcast with this quote: "You can't understand the forest without knowing the trees, and you can't understand the trees without seeing the forest." So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Business Between Us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.